The sawdust caught the afternoon light like gold dust as it fell from Jacob's hands, and Martha knew in that moment her secret was no longer hers alone. She stood in the doorway of his workshop, one hand pressed against the rough wooden frame, watching him bend over a piece of oak with such tenderness it made her throat tighten. The year was 1876, and the Montana Territory stretched wild and unforgiving around their small ranch, but inside this shed, everything felt impossibly gentle. Jacob's dark hair fell across his forehead as he worked, his shoulders moving with practiced rhythm beneath his worn cotton shirt. He was 26 years old, 3 years her senior, and she had loved him since the day he rode into her father's ranch looking for work 2 years ago. "What are you making?" Martha asked, though her voice came out smaller than she intended. Jacob looked up, and his gray eyes found hers with an intensity that always made her feel seen straight through to her bones. A slow smile spread across his weathered face, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made her remember why she had agreed to marry him last spring. "Come see," he said, setting down his carving knife and brushing the wood shavings from his leather chaps. She walked across the packed dirt floor, her skirts swishing around her ankles, and stopped beside him. On the workbench sat the beginnings of something she could not quite name at first. Curved pieces of wood, smooth and carefully shaped, waited to be assembled. Her breath caught as understanding dawned. "Jacob," she whispered, reaching out to touch one of the curved runners. "This is a cradle." He took her hand, calloused fingers wrapping around hers with gentle strength. "I know," he said simply. "I have known for near about 2 weeks now." Martha's heart hammered against her ribs. She had only begun to suspect herself a week ago when her monthly courses failed to arrive and the smell of coffee made her stomach turn. "But I have not told you anything." "I was not even certain until yesterday." Jacob pulled her closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face. "I could see it in your smile," he said, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "The way you have been touching your belly when you think nobody is watching. The way your eyes go soft when you look at the Henderson baby at church. The way you have been eating biscuits with honey every morning when you never had much sweet tooth before." Tears pricked at Martha's eyes, and she did not know if they came from joy or the overwhelming tenderness of being so thoroughly known. "You are certain you want this?" she asked, because she needed to hear him say it. "Martha Hayes," he said, using her married name with such reverence it felt like a prayer. "I have wanted nothing more than to build a family with you since the day you agreed to be my wife. I want this baby. I want 10 more after this one if God sees fit to bless us so. I want to grow old on this land with you and watch our children ride these hills." She kissed him then, standing on her toes to reach his mouth, pouring all her relief and love and hope into that single gesture. He kissed her back with the same fervor, his arms coming around her waist to hold her close. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, Martha rested her forehead against his chest and listened to the steady drum of his heart. "When did you start building it?" she asked. "The morning after I first noticed," Jacob admitted. "I have been coming out here every spare moment, wanting to have it ready before you told me. I wanted you to know that I was paying attention, that I see you even when you think yourself invisible." Martha pulled back to look at the cradle pieces again, imagining them fitted together, imagining a tiny baby wrapped in blankets and sleeping safe inside. "It will be beautiful," she said. "Not as beautiful as you," Jacob replied. And though the words might have sounded trite from another man's mouth, from him they rang with absolute sincerity. They stood together in the workshop as the afternoon light shifted and changed, planning their future in quiet voices. Jacob wanted to finish the cradle within the month, to have it ready long before the baby came. Martha worried about the winter ahead, about whether they had enough provisions stored, about whether she would know how to be a mother. Jacob soothed each fear with practical solutions and unwavering confidence in her strength. "We will figure it out together," he kept saying. "You and me, Martha, we can handle whatever comes." As the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they walked back to their small ranch house hand in hand. The structure was modest, just 3 rooms Jacob had built himself with timber from the nearby forest, but it was theirs. The land around them stretched for 200 acres, most of it grazing land for their small herd of cattle, and the horses Jacob trained and sold to other ranchers. Inside, Martha started supper while Jacob tended to the evening chores. She moved through the familiar motions of cutting potatoes and carrots, seasoning the venison Jacob had hunted last week, stoking the fire in their iron stove. But her mind kept drifting back to that cradle, to the careful love evident in every smooth curve Jacob had carved. When he came back inside, smelling of hay and horses and the cool evening air, she had supper laid out on their simple wooden table. They sat across from each other, the lamplight casting warm shadows on the walls, and talked about names. Jacob liked traditional names, biblical names that carried weight and meaning. Martha found herself drawn to names that spoke of the wild beauty around them, of the mountains and rivers and wide open sky. "What about Elijah for a boy?" Jacob suggested, passing her the bread. "Elijah Hayes," Martha tested the name on her tongue. "It has a strong sound to it." "And for a girl?" Jacob asked. Martha smiled. "I was thinking Rose or maybe Claire." "Rose Hayes," Jacob repeated, his eyes distant as he imagined it. "I like that. Delicate but hardy, like the wild roses that grow along the creek." They continued this way through supper, building castles in the air, imagining the child who would join them come spring. Martha had never felt so content, so certain that she was exactly where she belonged. She had grown up on a ranch 30 miles south, the only daughter among 4 brothers, and she had always known the ranching life. But being here with Jacob, building something entirely their own, felt different than anything she had experienced before. It felt like purpose. After supper, Jacob returned to his workshop while Martha cleaned the dishes and prepared dough for tomorrow's bread. She could hear the rhythmic scrape of his tools through the open window, a comforting sound that spoke of his presence and dedication. When she finished her tasks, she stepped outside into the cool night air. The stars stretched overhead in a glittering canopy, so many and so bright it seemed impossible to comprehend. Martha wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and walked toward the workshop, drawn by the lamp light spilling from its door. Jacob looked up when her shadow fell across his workspace. "Cannot stay away," he teased gently. "I wanted to watch you work," Martha said, settling herself on the 3-legged stool in the corner. "Tell me about what you are doing." So he did. Jacob explained how he was shaping each piece, how the wood needed to be smooth enough that no splinter could possibly harm tender baby skin, how the joints had to fit together perfectly to ensure stability. He talked about the rockers, how he was calculating the curve to provide gentle motion without tipping. He showed her where he planned to carve their initials and the baby's birth date once they knew it. "My father made my cradle," Jacob said quietly, running his hand over the wood. "It was one of the few things we brought west when we left Ohio. My mother told me he spent months on it, getting every detail just right. I slept in it, and then my brother after me and my 2 sisters after him. When the influenza took them all when I was 16, I kept that cradle. Brought it with me when I headed further west." Martha had heard pieces of Jacob's story before, but never this. "Where is it now?" she asked softly. "Destroyed in a river crossing 3 years back," Jacob said, and she could hear the old grief in his voice. "The wagon tipped and I lost near about everything I owned. But I remembered how it was built. I studied it enough times growing up, ran my hands over every joint and curve. This one I am building for our child. It is based on my father's design." Martha stood and moved to his side, wrapping her arms around him from behind. She rested her cheek against his back and held him while he worked, offering comfort through presence alone. They stayed that way for a long time, until the lamp oil ran low and Jacob's eyes began to droop with exhaustion. In bed that night, Martha lay curled against Jacob's side, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" he murmured, already half asleep. "For seeing me. For knowing me well enough to notice before I even said anything. For building that cradle with so much love already." Jacob's arm tightened around her. "Martha, loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done. Everything else just follows natural from that." She fell asleep with those words wrapped around her heart like a blanket. The next weeks passed in a rhythm of work and preparation. Jacob spent every spare moment on the cradle, and it began to take shape before Martha's eyes. The curved rockers attached to the base, the slatted sides rose up, smooth and perfectly spaced. He carved delicate designs into the headboard, vines and flowers that seemed to grow across the wood. Martha told her closest neighbor, Sarah Bennett, who lived 5 miles east with her husband and 3 young children. Sarah squealed with delight and immediately began planning a quilting bee to make blankets and clothes for the baby. Within days, it seemed the whole valley knew that Jacob and Martha Hayes were expecting their first child. The ranch work continued as always. Jacob broke horses and mended fences and prepared the winter feed for their livestock. Martha tended her garden, preserving the last of the autumn vegetables, and helped with the cattle when needed. Her body began to change in small ways. Her breasts grew tender, her waist began to thicken, and exhaustion hit her in waves that left her napping in the afternoon sun. Jacob noticed everything. He took over the heavier chores without being asked, insisted she rest more, brought her ginger tea when morning sickness struck. His attentiveness never felt suffocating, though. He gave her space when she needed it, trusted her to know her own limits, but stood ready to help the moment she wanted it. One October morning, Martha woke to find frost coating the grass outside their window. Winter was coming early this year, the old-timers at church said. They needed to make sure everything was ready. Jacob rode out that morning to bring their cattle down from the high pastures, and Martha spent the day checking their stores, making lists of what else they might need before the snows made the trip to town difficult. She was in the root cellar, counting jars of preserved vegetables, when she heard the thunder of hooves approaching fast. Her heart jumped into her throat because Jacob had taken their 2 horses, and this sounded like more animals. She climbed the cellar stairs quickly and emerged into the yard just as 4 riders came around the bend. They were rough-looking men, dusty and trail-worn, with guns hanging obvious on their hips. Martha's hand instinctively went to her belly, protective, as the lead rider pulled up his horse near her. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, his smile not reaching his cold blue eyes. "Your husband around. He is checking the herd," Martha said, keeping her voice steady. "Can I help you with something?" The man's gaze traveled over her, assessing, making her skin crawl. "We are looking for fresh mounts. Heard tell there was a horse breaker in these parts." "My husband sells horses," Martha acknowledged carefully, "but he is particular about who he sells to. If you want to leave your names, I will have him call on you." "That is not quite how this works," another rider said, this one with a scar running down his cheek. "We need horses now, and we are prepared to take them." Martha's mind raced. Their best horses were in the near pasture, just visible from where they stood. Jacob would not be back for hours. She was alone, pregnant, facing down 4 armed men who clearly had no intention of paying for anything. "The horses are not broken yet," she lied smoothly. "My husband has a specific process. If you take them now, they will throw you first chance they get. Probably break your neck in the process. But if you want to wait for Jacob, he can show you what we have available." The lead rider studied her, trying to decide if she was telling the truth. Martha met his gaze steadily, channeling every bit of steel her father had taught her to carry. Ranch women did not show fear, especially not to men looking for weakness to exploit. "How long until he gets back?" Scarface asked. "Could be an hour, could be 3, Martha said with a shrug. "Depends on how scattered the herd is." The men exchanged glances. Martha could see them weighing their options, trying to decide if it was worth the wait. Her hand stayed on her belly, and she realized one of the riders had noticed. His expression shifted slightly, something almost like shame crossing his features. "Let us go," that third rider said to the others. "There is a ranch 10 miles south, we can get horses there." "But these ones are right here," the lead man protested. "And this woman is clearly expecting," the third rider said firmly. "I am not about to terrorize a pregnant woman for horses. We can find mounts elsewhere." There was a tense moment where Martha thought the leader might argue, might decide to take what he wanted anyway. But something in the third rider's tone seemed to carry weight, and finally the leader spat in the dirt and yanked his horse around. "This is a waste of time," he muttered, but he was already riding away. Martha stood frozen in the yard until the riders disappeared from sight, her heart hammering so hard she felt dizzy. Only when she was certain they were truly gone did she allow herself to sink down onto the porch steps, her legs suddenly unable to hold her weight. She sat there for a long time, trying to calm her racing thoughts, one hand pressed protectively over her stomach. The baby was still so small, barely there at all, but already Martha felt fierce love and protectiveness that surprised her with its intensity. When Jacob finally returned as the sun was setting, leading their cattle into the near pasture, Martha was waiting for him. She had recovered her composure, had decided not to tell him what happened because she knew it would only worry him, make him reluctant to leave her alone. But the moment she saw him, dusty and tired and so wonderfully familiar, the whole story came pouring out. Jacob's face went pale, then flushed with anger. "They could have hurt you," he said, his hands gripping her shoulders. "Martha, if anything had happened to you or the baby, but nothing did," she interrupted gently. "One of them had some decency, they left." "That is not good enough," Jacob said. He pulled her against his chest, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "I should have been here." "You were doing what needed to be done," Martha said into his shirt. "We cannot stop living our lives because of what might happen." But Jacob was already planning. That night, he rode to the Bennett ranch and came back with their oldest son, Tom, a sturdy boy of 17 who Jacob hired to stay at their place during the days when he needed to be away. Tom would sleep in the workshop and help with chores, an extra pair of hands and an extra gun if needed. Martha wanted to protest that it was not necessary, but she could see the fear underlying Jacob's determination. So she accepted Tom's presence gracefully and found herself grateful for the company during the long days when Jacob worked distant parts of their land. Tom was a good kid, quiet and hardworking, and he looked at the cradle Jacob was building with open admiration. "My pa made cradles for all of us," he said one morning as he watched Jacob sand the wood to silky smoothness. "But nothing as fine as this." "Your father is a good man," Jacob replied. "He has raised fine children." "Ma says you and Mrs. Hayes are good people too," Tom said. "Says we are lucky to have neighbors like you." The cradle was nearly finished now. Jacob had added a small drawer at the base for storing baby clothes, had carved their initials intertwined on the headboard, had rubbed the whole thing with oil until it gleamed like honey in the light. Looking at it made Martha's throat tight with emotion. As October turned to November, the first real snow fell. Martha woke to a world transformed, everything clean and white and silent. She stood at the window with her hand on her belly, which had begun to swell noticeably now, and watched Jacob and Tom breaking ice on the water troughs for the animals. The baby moved for the first time that day, a flutter so light Martha thought she imagined it at first. But then it came again, a definite little tumble inside her, and she gasped with the wonder of it. She wanted to run outside and tell Jacob immediately, but she decided to wait, to give him the news as a gift that evening. She spent the day cooking his favorite meal, a beef stew rich with vegetables from their stores, fresh bread, and a dried apple pie. When Jacob came in from the cold, stamping snow from his boots, the house smelled like heaven. "What is the occasion?" he asked, hanging his coat and hat on the pegs by the door. "The baby moved today," Martha said simply, and watched his whole face transform. He crossed to her in 3 long strides, dropping to his knees in front of her and pressing his hands to her belly. Here, he asked. Right here, Martha said, guiding his hands to where she had felt that first flutter. They waited together, barely breathing, until it happened again. A tiny movement, barely perceptible but definitely there. Jacob's eyes went bright with tears. "Hello, little one," he whispered to her belly. "We are waiting for you. We love you already." Martha ran her fingers through his dark hair, overwhelmed with love for this man who had given her so much. "Come eat before it gets cold," she said softly. At dinner, Jacob told her that the cradle was finished. "I want to bring it into the house tomorrow," he said. "Set it up in our room so it is ready." "The baby will not be here until spring," Martha reminded him, amused. "I know, but I want it there anyway," Jacob said stubbornly. "Want to see it every day, imagine our little one sleeping safe inside." So the next day, they brought the cradle into their bedroom, positioning it near the window where morning light would fall gentle across it. Martha lined it with quilts Sarah had given her, soft cotton in cheerful calico patterns. The cradle rocked smooth and silent on its curved runners, perfect in every detail. That night, Jacob pulled Martha close in bed and talked about the future. He wanted to expand the house before next winter, add a proper nursery and maybe another bedroom for future children. He talked about teaching their son or daughter to ride, to care for animals, to respect the land and the hard work ranching required. He talked about growing old together, watching their children have children of their own. "You are getting ahead of yourself," Martha teased, but she loved hearing him dream out loud. "Maybe," Jacob admitted, "but I have learned not to take any day for granted. When you find something worth holding on to, you plan for it, you build toward it, you give it everything you have." Winter settled in hard after that. The snow piled high, and the temperatures dropped so low that ice formed on the inside of the windows. Jacob and Tom worked constantly to keep the animals fed and watered, to keep the paths clear, to haul enough firewood to keep the house warm. Martha spent her days cooking and mending and preparing baby clothes from fabric she had been saving. Her body continued to change. By December, there was no hiding her condition. Her belly swelled round and firm, and the baby's movements became stronger, more frequent. Sometimes Jacob would sit with his hand on her stomach for an hour at a time, marveling at every kick and roll. Christmas came, simple but joyful. The Bennett family came for dinner, along with 2 other neighboring families. The small house overflowed with people and laughter, and the smell of roast turkey and potatoes. The children played games while the adults talked, and Martha felt her baby doing somersaults in response to all the noise and excitement. Sarah pulled Martha aside at one point, her eyes knowing. "You are glowing," she said warmly. "Being with child suits you." "I feel enormous," Martha confessed, but she was smiling. "Wait until month 8, Sarah laughed. "But truly, Martha, I am happy for you and Jacob. You two are good together. This baby is lucky to have you." As winter deepened into January, Martha began to feel more uncomfortable. Her back ached, her feet swelled, and sleeping became difficult. Jacob did everything he could to help, rubbing her sore muscles, propping her up with pillows, bringing her tea and snacks at all hours. "I love you," he would say a dozen times a day, as if reminding both of them. "I love you too," Martha always replied, because it was true and because she needed him to know it. The baby was active now, rolling and kicking so vigorously that sometimes Jacob could see the movements from across the room. "Strong one you have got in there," he said with obvious pride. Martha had her moments of fear. She had seen women die in childbirth, had lost her own mother to it when she was 12, and her mother had tried for one last baby. The memory haunted her sometimes in the dark hours of night. But then Jacob would pull her close and whisper reassurances, and she would remember that she was strong, that she came from a long line of strong women, that she could do this. February brought a brief warming spell, and then another massive snowstorm that left them snowed in for nearly a week. Tom could not make it from his family's ranch, so Jacob handled all the outdoor work himself while Martha kept the home fires burning. They talked for hours during those isolated days, sharing stories from their childhoods, confessing old fears and hopes, growing even closer in their forced solitude. "Sometimes I cannot believe this is my life," Martha said one evening as they sat by the fire, her feet in Jacob's lap as he rubbed them. "That I get to have this, have our baby coming. It feels too good to be real." "It is real," Jacob said firmly. "We built this together, Martha. We worked for it, and we get to enjoy it." As March arrived and the first hints of spring began to show in the lengthening days and occasional warmer breezes, Martha grew increasingly uncomfortable and anxious. The baby could come any time now, Sarah had said when she visited last week. Martha should stay close to home, have everything ready, and send for the midwife at the first sign of labor. Jacob refused to leave her side. He brought Tom back full-time and had him handle anything that took him away from the immediate house area. Martha alternated between being grateful for his presence and feeling smothered by his constant attention. "I am not made of glass," she said one afternoon when Jacob tried to stop her from reaching for a cup on a high shelf. "I know," Jacob said, "but I am allowed to worry about you." They stood there at an impasse until Martha's expression softened. "I know you are scared," she said gently. "I am scared too, but we cannot live in fear. We have to trust that everything will be all right." "What if it is not?" Jacob asked, voicing the terror he had been carrying for months. "Then we will face it together," Martha said, taking his hands. "Whatever happens, we face it together." But Jacob could not shake his fear. That night, Martha woke to find him standing over the cradle, one hand resting on its smooth edge. She watched him for a moment before speaking. "Come back to bed," she said softly. He turned to her, and in the moonlight coming through the window she could see tears on his face. "I cannot lose you," he said. "Martha, I cannot." She struggled to sit up, her pregnant belly making it awkward. "You are not going to lose me," she said with as much confidence as she could muster. "I am strong, Jacob. I come from strong stock. My grandmother had 11 babies and lived to be 83. I am going to be fine." "You cannot know that," Jacob said. "No," Martha admitted, "I cannot. But I choose to believe it anyway. And I need you to believe it too, because I need your strength right now, not your fear." Her words seemed to reach him. Jacob took a deep breath, wiped his eyes, and came back to bed. He curled around her as much as her belly allowed, and she felt him gradually relax into sleep. 2 days later, Martha woke just before dawn with a deep ache in her lower back. She lay still, trying to determine if this was just another pregnancy discomfort or something more. Then she felt it, a tightening across her belly that built and built before finally releasing. "Jacob," she said, shaking his shoulder, "it is time." He was awake instantly, alert and focused. "Are you certain?" Another contraction came, stronger this time, and Martha breathed through it. "Yes," she gasped when it passed. "Send Tom for the midwife, Sarah too if he can." Jacob was already pulling on his clothes, moving with calm efficiency despite the fear she could see in his eyes. He woke Tom and gave him instructions, then came back to Martha. "What do you need?" he asked. "Help me walk," Martha said. "Sarah told me that moving helps in the early stages." So Jacob helped her out of bed and supported her as she paced the small house, pausing when contractions came to breathe through them. Tom rode out fast, and all they could do was wait and hope he could bring help in time. The contractions grew stronger and closer together as the morning progressed. Jacob boiled water, gathered clean towels, did all the things Sarah had instructed in her many talks with Martha about what to expect. He held Martha's hand, wiped her forehead, murmured encouragement and love. "You are doing so well," he kept saying. "You are so strong, Martha. I love you so much." The midwife, Mrs. Callahan, arrived near noon with Sarah right behind her. They took over with brisk competence, examining Martha and declaring that things were progressing normally. "First babies take their time," Mrs. Callahan said. "Could be hours yet." Jacob wanted to stay, but the women shooed him out. "This is women's work," Mrs. Callahan said firmly. "You go chop wood or pace the yard, but you cannot be in here." Martha reached for his hand before he left. "I will be fine," she promised, though her face was pale and strained. "I love you," Jacob said. I will be right outside if you need me." The afternoon stretched into evening, and Martha's world narrowed to the rhythm of contractions and brief respites between. Sarah held her hand and told her stories to distract her. Mrs. Callahan checked her progress periodically and declared everything normal if slow. The pain grew intense, overwhelming, beyond anything Martha had imagined. "I cannot do this," she gasped at one point, exhausted and scared. "You are doing it," Sarah said firmly. "You are strong, Martha, just a while longer." Outside, Jacob wore a path in the snow, pacing back and forth, stopping every time he heard Martha cry out. Tom tried to distract him with work tasks, but Jacob could focus on nothing except what was happening inside that house. As night fell and lamps were lit, Martha's labor intensified. Mrs. Callahan told her it was time to push, and Martha bore down with everything she had, desperate to meet this baby, to have the ordeal finished. She pushed and rested and pushed again, following Mrs. Callahan's instructions, drawing on reserves of strength she did not know she possessed. "The head is crowning," Mrs. Callahan announced. "One more big push, Martha." Martha gathered herself, thought of Jacob waiting outside, thought of the cradle he had built with so much love, and pushed with every bit of strength remaining in her body. She felt a sensation of release, and suddenly the room filled with the thin, reedy cry of a newborn baby. "It is a boy," Mrs. Callahan said, holding up the squirming, red-faced infant. "A healthy boy." Sarah was crying and laughing at the same time. "Martha, you did it, Mrs. Callahan cleaned the baby quickly and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him on Martha's chest. Martha looked down at her son, at his tiny scrunched face and waving fists, and fell completely in love. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, little one." "I will get Jacob," Sarah said, hurrying to the door. Jacob burst into the room moments later, his face desperate with worry until he saw Martha sitting up in bed, tired but smiling, holding their baby. He moved to her side like a man in a dream, staring down at the bundle in her arms. "It is a boy," Martha said softly. "We have a son, Jacob." Jacob reached out with a trembling hand to touch the baby's cheek. "He is perfect," he breathed. "You are both perfect." He looked at Martha with so much love and relief that she felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I was so scared," he admitted. "I know," Martha said, "but we are all right. We are all fine." Jacob carefully took the baby from her, cradling his son against his chest with tender reverence. The baby's crying had quieted, and he looked up at his father with unfocused dark blue eyes. "Elijah," Jacob said. "Our son Elijah." "Elijah Hayes," Martha repeated, and it sounded exactly right. Mrs. Callahan finished tending to Martha while Jacob held his son, unable to look away. Tom peeked in to offer congratulations before heading back to his family with the good news. Sarah stayed through the night, helping Martha get settled, showing her how to nurse the baby, making sure everyone had what they needed. When they were finally alone, just the three of them in the quiet hours before dawn, Jacob placed Elijah in the cradle he had built. The baby looked impossibly tiny in it, swaddled in soft blankets, sleeping peacefully. Jacob and Martha stood side by side, looking down at their son, and Martha felt a sense of completion she had never experienced before. "You knew before I told you," Martha said quietly, remembering how this all began. "You carved this cradle because you could see it in my smile." "I could see it in everything about you," Jacob said, his arm around her waist. "You glowed with it, Martha, you still do." They stood watch over their sleeping son a while longer, then Jacob helped Martha back to bed. She was exhausted beyond measure, sore and tired, but happier than she had ever been. Jacob climbed in beside her, careful of her tender body, and held her close. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "For what?" "For this, for him. For being strong enough to bring our son into the world, for being you." Martha turned her face to kiss him, soft and sweet. "We did this together," she reminded him. "All of it together." They fell asleep like that, holding each other, their baby sleeping safe in his cradle nearby, the Montana winter deep and quiet outside their windows. The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and constant baby care. Elijah was a good baby, but he was still a newborn, needing to eat every few hours, needing to be changed and comforted and held. Martha recovered slowly from the birth, grateful for Jacob's help with everything from household chores to bringing the baby to her for nighttime feedings. Jacob was besotted with his son. He would hold Elijah for hours, talking to him in a low voice, telling him about the ranch and the horses and all the things they would do together when Elijah was older. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with Elijah when he was fussy, and stared at him with perpetual wonder. "I cannot believe we made him," he said one evening, watching Elijah sleep in his cradle. "Well, we had help from God," Martha said with amusement. "You know what I mean," Jacob replied. "He is half you and half me, Martha, our son, our family." As March turned to April and the snow began to melt in earnest, revealing the brown earth and first green shoots of spring, Martha felt stronger. She was able to do more around the house, could take on some of her old chores. Elijah was growing, becoming more alert, starting to focus on faces and make small cooing sounds that delighted both his parents. Sarah visited often, bringing food and help and admiring Elijah's every development. Other neighbors came too, bringing gifts and congratulations. The Hayasees were well liked in the valley and everyone wanted to meet the new baby. "He has your eyes," everyone told Jacob, but Martha's nose, others would add. Martha thought he looked like himself, like Elijah, a perfect combination of both of them, but also uniquely his own person. By May, when Elijah was 2 months old, they had settled into a routine that felt sustainable. Martha managed most of the household tasks and baby care during the day while Jacob worked the ranch. Tom had gone back to helping just a few days a week now that the emergency of Martha's labor was past. In the evenings, Jacob would take over with Elijah, giving Martha time to rest or work on other projects. They were sitting on the porch one warm evening watching the sun set over the mountains, Elijah asleep in Jacob's arms when Martha said, "I want more." Jacob looked at her, surprised. "More what? More children," Martha clarified. "I know Elijah is still so young, but I loved being pregnant, Jacob. I love this. I want to fill our house with babies." Jacob's smile was slow and warm. "I want that too," he said. "A whole brood of them running wild over this land." "Not too wild," Martha said, but she was smiling. That summer was one of the happiest of Martha's life. Elijah grew and thrived, becoming a chubby, happy baby who smiled at everyone and everything. Jacob expanded the house as he had promised, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper parlor. Martha planted a bigger garden, putting in vegetables and herbs and flowers. Their cattle herd grew, and Jacob's reputation as a horse trainer brought steady business. On Elijah's first birthday, in March of 1877, they threw a party that filled their enlarged house with friends and neighbors. Elijah smashed his face into a small cake Martha had made, getting frosting everywhere, and everyone laughed at his delighted expression. Jacob held his son up high, and Elijah squealed with joy, his baby laughter ringing through the house. "This is what I always dreamed of," Jacob told Martha that night after everyone had gone home and Elijah was asleep in his cradle. "This family, this life, this happiness, you gave me all of it, Martha." "We gave it to each other," Martha corrected, because it was important to her that he understood it was a partnership. By summer, Martha suspected she was pregnant again. Her courses had stopped, and she felt that same bone-deep exhaustion she remembered from carrying Elijah. But she waited to be sure before saying anything, partly because she wanted to be certain, and partly because she loved having the secret to herself for a little while. She told Jacob on an August evening when the air was thick with heat and the cicadas sang their evening chorus. They were sitting on the porch, watching Elijah play with wooden blocks Jacob had carved for him. "I am pregnant again," Martha said simply. Jacob's head whipped around to look at her. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without more time passing," Martha said. "But yes, I am certain." This time, Jacob's reaction was pure joy with no undercurrent of fear. He knew Martha could do this now. He had watched her bring Elijah into the world, had seen her strength firsthand. He pulled her into a tight embrace, laughing into her hair. "Another baby," he said. "Elijah is going to be a big brother." This pregnancy felt different from the first. Martha was busier, chasing after an active toddler while her body changed and grew. She was more tired, less able to rest when she needed it. But she was also more confident, less afraid of what was to come. Jacob started carving again in the evenings, making a second cradle identical to the first. "Our children should each have their own," he explained when Martha asked why he did not just reuse Elijah's. Elijah was fascinated by his mother's growing belly. He would pat it gently and say "baby" in his toddling way. Martha would take his little hand and place it where the baby kicked, and Elijah would giggle with delight at the movement. Winter came again, and this time Martha knew what to expect from labor. She was calmer when her pains started in late February, a few weeks before the baby was due. Jacob sent for Mrs. Callahan and Sarah, got everything ready, and stayed calmer himself this time. The labor was faster than with Elijah, only 6 hours from first pain to final push. And when the baby emerged, red-faced and squalling, Mrs. Callahan announced, "Another boy. You have another fine son." They named him Samuel, and he looked nothing like Elijah had as a newborn. Where Elijah had been round-faced and placid, Samuel was lean and alert from the start, with a full head of dark hair. Martha fell in love with him just as completely as she had with Elijah, marveling at how her heart seemed to expand to hold this new child without diminishing her love for the first. Elijah was fascinated by his baby brother, wanting to help with everything. Jacob had to watch him carefully to make sure his help did not become dangerous, but mostly Elijah was remarkably gentle. He would bring diapers when asked, would pat Samuel's back when he cried, would sing nonsense songs that sometimes actually helped soothe the baby. "You are such a good big brother," Martha would tell him, and Elijah would beam with pride. Life became even busier with 2 children under 3. Martha felt like she was constantly nursing or changing diapers or breaking up toddler tantrums or cooking or cleaning. But she loved it. She loved the organized chaos, the way her house rang with children's voices, the sense of purpose that filled every moment. Jacob was an equal partner in parenting, never treating it as solely Martha's responsibility. He would come in from a full day of ranch work and immediately take over with the children, giving Martha time to cook supper in peace or just sit down for a moment. He read stories to Elijah at bedtime and walked Samuel around the house when he was colicky. "I never want them to wonder if their father loved them," Jacob said one night when Martha commented on how good he was with the boys. "I want them to know it in their bones, the way I knew my father loved me before he died." As the years passed, their family continued to grow. Rose was born in 1879, a beautiful baby girl with Martha's red hair and Jacob's gray eyes. Then came Thomas in 1881, named after Tom Bennett, who had helped them so much in those early years. Emma arrived in 1883, another girl, this one with dark hair and Martha's green eyes. And finally, in 1885, came Benjamin, the baby of the family, born when Martha was 32 and Jacob was 35. 6 children filled their house with noise and love and constant activity. Jacob had expanded the house twice more, adding bedrooms and a separate dining room. The ranch prospered, allowing them to hire help for the heavy work. Martha's days were full from before dawn until long after dark, but she would not have traded her life for anything. The children grew. Elijah became a serious, responsible boy who loved working with his father and the horses. Samuel was the adventurous one, always climbing trees or exploring the creek or getting into scrapes. Rose had her mother's practical nature and her father's gentle heart. Thomas was the peacemaker, always smoothing over conflicts between siblings. Emma was dramatic and creative, constantly putting on shows for the family. And Benjamin was the baby, spoiled by everyone but sweet-natured despite it. Jacob carved a cradle for each child and Martha saved them all. They lined one wall of the bedroom she and Jacob still shared, a testament to their growing family. Sometimes Martha would run her hand over them, remembering each baby, each birth, each first moment of holding a new child. "We have been blessed," she would tell Jacob. "We have," he always agreed. They had hard times too, of course. There was the winter of 1882 when a blizzard killed half their herd, and they struggled to make ends meet until spring. There was the summer Rose got scarlet fever, and they spent 3 days thinking they might lose her before her fever finally broke. There was the time Samuel broke his arm falling from the barn loft, and Martha thought she might faint from the sight of the bone poking through skin. There were arguments and disagreements, times when money was tight, moments of frustration and exhaustion. But through it all, Martha and Jacob held firm to each other. They had built their marriage on a foundation of genuine love and respect, and it sustained them through every challenge. They made decisions together, supported each other's strengths, and helped each other through weaknesses. They laughed together, cried together, and built a life that was richer than either had dreamed possible. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1886, Jacob gave Martha a gift. It was a wooden plaque, beautifully carved with words burned into the surface. "Martha Hayes, I could see it in your smile." "What is this?" Martha asked, running her fingers over the letters. "A reminder," Jacob said, "of where this all started. Of that day I began carving the first cradle because I could see in your smile that our lives were about to change. I never want to forget that moment, Martha. It was the beginning of everything that matters." Martha felt tears prick her eyes. They stood in the parlor of their expanded home, the sounds of their 6 children playing outside drifting through the windows, and she looked at this man who had given her so much. "I love you," she said. "I have loved you from the beginning, and I will love you until the end. And beyond," Jacob added, kissing her softly. "And beyond." The years continued to pass. The children grew into young people with personalities and dreams of their own. Elijah showed every sign of wanting to take over the ranch someday. Samuel talked about going west to see the ocean. Rose wanted to be a teacher. Thomas dreamed of being a veterinarian. Emma wanted to go to a big city and perform on stage. Benjamin was still young enough that his dreams changed weekly. Martha and Jacob supported each of them, encouraging their interests while also teaching them the value of hard work and family. They hosted dinners that overflowed with children and grandparents, neighbors and friends. Their home became known as a place of warmth and welcome, where anyone who needed help could find it. In 1890, when Elijah was 14 and starting to look more like a young man than a boy, Martha found herself pregnant one more time. It was unexpected, as she had assumed her childbearing years were behind her, but at 37, her body proved it still had surprises. 7 children, Jacob said when she told him, shaking his head in wonder. "Martha, we are going to have 7 children. Are you happy?" Martha asked because at their age another baby was both a blessing and a challenge. "I am overjoyed," Jacob said firmly. "Every child we have been given is a gift. This one is no different." Jacob carved a 7th cradle, his hands as skilled as ever despite the years. The other children were excited about the new baby. Even Elijah, who acted like he was too old for such things, but could be caught smiling at Martha's growing belly when he thought no one was watching. Anna was born in early spring of 1891, a tiny, perfect baby girl who completed their family. She had Jacob's dark hair and Martha's delicate features, and from the moment she arrived, she was doted on by every member of the family. Her older siblings fought over who got to hold her, and Jacob was utterly helpless against her infant charms. "She is our last," Martha said one night, holding Anna while the baby nursed. "I am certain of it this time." "Then we will treasure every moment," Jacob replied, watching his daughter with soft eyes. The older children began to leave home as they reached adulthood. Elijah stayed to work the ranch, building a small house on the property when he married a neighboring rancher's daughter in 1895. Samuel did eventually go west, sending letters full of adventures and stories. Rose became a teacher as she had dreamed, working in a school 2 towns over. Thomas went to university to study animal medicine. Emma shocked everyone by actually making it to San Francisco and joining a theater company. Benjamin, true to his changeable nature, tried several different paths before settling on carpentry. Through it all, Martha and Jacob remained the center that held everything together. They grew older, their hair graying, their bodies showing the wear of hard work and full lives, but their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened with time, becoming something solid and enduring that their children could see and emulate in their own relationships. Anna was the last child at home, and she brought joy to Martha and Jacob's later years. She was a happy child, creative and kind, and she loved helping her father in his workshop. Jacob taught her to carve, and she proved to have a natural talent for it. On a summer evening in 1902, Martha stood on the porch of their home and looked out over the land they had built a life on. She was 49 years old and Jacob was 52. Their oldest grandchild had just been born, making them officially old, though Martha did not feel it inside. She felt vital and alive, grateful for every day. Jacob came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," Martha said. "All of it. How we started, where we are now, what comes next." "Any regrets?" Jacob asked. Martha turned in his arms to face him. His hair was more gray than dark now, and lines creased his face, but his eyes were the same gray she had fallen in love with all those years ago. "Not a single one," she said honestly. "You? Only that we did not have more time," Jacob said, "that we will not have forever." "We will have enough," Martha said firmly. "We will have enough time, Jacob, and we will have lived every moment of it well." They stood together as the sun set, painting the Montana sky in brilliant colors, and Martha thought about that day so long ago when Jacob had been carving a cradle before she even told him she was pregnant. He had known her so well, had loved her so completely, that he could see the truth in her smile. That same knowing, that same love, had sustained them through nearly 3 decades of marriage and would sustain them through whatever years remained. Anna came out onto the porch, now 11 years old and full of questions about the world. "Papa, will you help me with my carving?" she asked. "I am trying to make a box for Mama's birthday, but I cannot get the corners to fit right." "Of course," Jacob said, but he looked at Martha. "Coming." "In a minute," Martha said. "I want to watch the sunset a bit longer." She watched Jacob walk into his workshop with their youngest daughter, heard their voices mixing together as he gave instructions, and she asked questions. Inside the house, the cradles were stored in the attic now, all 7 of them, waiting for grandchildren to use them. The house itself stood solid and well built, full of memories and love. This was the life they had built together, Martha thought. This ranch, this family, this enduring love. It had started with a man who paid attention, who carved a cradle because he could see the truth in his wife's smile. And it had grown into something neither of them could have imagined that day. The years continued their steady march. Martha and Jacob watched their children build their own lives, welcomed grandchildren with joy, and grew old together on the land they loved. They had hard days still, times when their aging bodies protested the work, when they missed the children who had moved away, when they grieved friends lost to time and illness. But they had each other, and that made everything bearable. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1896, their children threw them a party that filled the house to bursting. All 7 children came home, bringing spouses and grandchildren, and the noise and chaos reminded Martha of when they were all young and lived under one roof. Jacob gave a speech at dinner, his voice still strong despite his years. 30 years ago, I married the most remarkable woman I have ever known, he said, looking at Martha with undiminished love. She has given me 7 beautiful children, a home that is the envy of everyone who enters it, and a life richer than I ever dreamed possible. Martha, you are the best decision I ever made. Martha wiped tears from her eyes as everyone applauded. When it was her turn to speak, she kept it simple. Jacob Hayes, You knew I was pregnant before I told you because you paid attention to me. You have been paying attention for 30 years and I have never felt unseen or unheard or unloved. Thank you for that. Thank you for everything." They renewed their vows that day, standing in the parlor of their home with their children and grandchildren as witnesses. It was not legally necessary, but it felt right to reaffirm their promises after 30 years. They had kept those promises through everything, and they intended to keep them until death parted them. As they moved into the 20th century, Martha and Jacob gradually slowed down. They handed more of the ranch work to Elijah, who proved to be an excellent manager. They spent more time with their grandchildren, spoiling them in ways they had never spoiled their own children. They took pleasure in simple things like sitting on the porch together in the evening, or working side by side in the garden, or reading aloud to each other from books they borrowed from the traveling library. "We did good, did we not?" Jacob asked one evening in 1905. He was 55 now, his body showing the wear of decades of hard physical labor. Martha was 52, her red hair now streaked with silver, her face lined but still beautiful to Jacob. "We did very good," Martha agreed. She reached for his hand, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. "We built something that will outlast us, Jacob. This ranch, our children, the love we put into everything, it will go on." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains they had spent their entire adult lives looking at. Anna, now 14 and looking more like a young woman every day, brought them coffee and then settled at their feet with a book. This was peace, Martha thought. This was what they had worked for. The 7 cradles sat in the attic, waiting for grandchildren. Elijah's wife had used the first one for their baby. Rose had borrowed the 4th for her son. Samuel had written asking if they could ship one to California for his expected child. Each cradle was being used and loved, just as Jacob had intended when he built them. In 1908, Martha and Jacob celebrated their 42nd wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them and Anna, who still lived at home. The other children came when they could, but everyone had their own lives now, their own families to tend. Martha and Jacob did not mind. They had raised their children to be independent and they took pride in how well each of them was doing. 42 years, Jacob mused. Longer than I ever expected to be blessed. "We are not done yet," Martha said firmly. She refused to talk as if their time was ending, even though she knew they were both growing older, that their remaining years were fewer than the ones behind them. "No," Jacob agreed, squeezing her hand. "We are not done yet." They had a few more good years. They saw more grandchildren born, attended weddings, celebrated holidays surrounded by family. Jacob's hands grew stiff with arthritis, but he still carved small things, toys for the grandchildren, small decorative pieces that Martha treasured. Martha's energy waned, but she still kept house, still cooked the meals that brought everyone together, still maintained the garden that had fed their family for decades. Anna stayed home longer than the other children had, not marrying until she was 22. Her wedding in 1913 was a beautiful affair, held at the ranch with the whole valley in attendance. Martha cried watching her youngest daughter get married, remembering when Anna was just a baby in the 7th cradle, impossible to imagine grown. "They all leave eventually," Jacob said, holding Martha close as they watched Anna and her new husband ride away to start their own life. "That is how it should be," Martha said. "We raised them to leave to build their own lives, but the house felt empty with just the two of them." They had not lived alone since before Elijah was born 37 years ago. It took time to adjust to the quiet, to the lack of constant activity and noise. But they adjusted, as they had adjusted to everything else life brought them. They were in their 60s now, officially old by any measure. Jacob's dark hair was completely silver, and his face was deeply lined from decades of working outdoors. Martha's red hair had faded to a soft gray-white, and her hands showed the wear of a lifetime of hard work. But when they looked at each other, They still saw the young people they had been, the cowboy and the ranch girl who had fallen in love and built an empire together. On a spring morning in 1916, 50 years after they first met, Martha woke to find Jacob had not gotten up yet. This was unusual, as he was always an early riser. She turned to look at him and found him watching her with a soft smile. "What?" she asked, still half asleep. "I was just thinking," Jacob said, "about the day I started carving that first cradle. About how I knew you were pregnant before you told me because I could see it in your smile. Do you remember?" "Of course I remember," Martha said. "It was 40 years ago, Jacob. How could I forget?" "I knew that day that our lives were about to change forever," Jacob continued, "and they did. Martha, you have given me the most extraordinary life. I want you to know that." Something in his tone made Martha's heart clench. "Why does this sound like goodbye?" she asked, fear suddenly sharp in her chest. "It is not," Jacob assured her, reaching for her hand. "I am not going anywhere yet. I just wanted to say it, to make sure you know." They lay together in the bed they had shared for 44 years, holding hands, and talked about their life. They remembered the hard times and the good times, the children and grandchildren, the ranch and the life they had built. They talked until the sun was high in the sky and hunger finally drove them from bed, but Martha could not shake the feeling that something had shifted. Jacob seemed more reflective, more focused on the past than the future. She tried to tell herself it was just age, just the natural tendency of old people to look backward. But worry gnawed at her. 2 months later, in July, Jacob collapsed while working in his workshop. Elijah found him and brought him into the house, and the doctor was summoned from town. Martha sat beside Jacob's bed, holding his hand while the doctor examined him. "His heart," the doctor said quietly when he finished. "It is giving out, Martha. I am sorry." "Can you fix it?" Martha demanded, though she knew the answer. "No," the doctor said gently. "All we can do is keep him comfortable. It could be days or weeks or even months. But his heart is tired, Martha. It will not hold out much longer." Martha sent word to all the children, and they came as quickly as they could. Within 3 days, all 7 were gathered at the ranch, along with their spouses and many of the grandchildren. The house was full again, but not in the joyful way Martha was used to. There was a heaviness in the air, a sense of waiting. Jacob was lucid and alert, able to talk to each of his children, to hold his grandchildren, to reminisce and share wisdom. But Martha could see him fading, his strength ebbing with each passing day. She refused to leave his side, sleeping in a chair next to their bed, eating only when the children forced food on her. "You need to rest," Rose told her gently. "I will rest when this is over," Martha said firmly. "Right now I need to be here." On a warm evening in late July, with the sun setting outside their window, Jacob called Martha to his side. The children gave them privacy, though they stayed close in case they were needed. "Martha," Jacob said, his voice weak but clear, "I need you to promise me something." "Anything?" Martha said, clutching his hand. "Promise me you will be all right after I am gone," Jacob said. "That you will not give up, that you will keep living and loving and being the remarkable woman you are. Promise me, Martha." "I cannot promise that," Martha said, tears streaming down her face. "Jacob, do not leave me. We were supposed to have more time." "We had enough time," Jacob said, echoing her words from years before. "We had enough, Martha, and it was good. Every moment of it was good." He reached up to touch her face, his hand trembling with the effort. "I could see it in your smile, remember? That day I started the cradle. I could see our whole future in your smile, and it was more beautiful than I ever imagined." "Jacob," Martha sobbed, leaning her forehead against his. "I love you," Jacob whispered. "I will love you beyond death, beyond everything. You are my heart, Martha Hayes." "I love you too," Martha said. "I love you so much it hurts." They lay together as the sun set and the room grew dark. Martha felt the moment Jacob's breathing changed, became shallower, more labored. She called for the children, and they all gathered around the bed, holding each other, holding their father. Jacob looked at each of them, his eyes full of love and pride. Then his gaze came back to Martha, and he smiled. It was the same smile he had given her 1,000 times, gentle and loving and full of certainty. "See you soon," he whispered, and then he was gone. The silence that followed was absolute. Martha sat frozen, still holding Jacob's hand, unable to process that he was truly gone. Then Anna began to cry, and it broke the spell. All the children were crying, holding each other, grieving the loss of their father. Martha did not cry. She sat beside Jacob's body, holding his hand, and felt a numbness spread through her. This was not possible. They were supposed to have more time. They were supposed to grow older together, to meet more grandchildren, to sit on their porch until they were ancient and gray. But time had run out, and Jacob was gone, and Martha did not know how to exist in a world without him. The funeral was held 3 days later. It seemed like the entire valley came to pay respects to Jacob Hayes, the cowboy who had built a life and a family and a reputation through hard work and integrity. Person after person told Martha what Jacob had meant to them, how he had helped them, what a good man he was. She accepted their condolences with grace, but inside she felt hollow. They buried Jacob on a hill overlooking the ranch with a view of the mountains he had loved. The children wanted Martha to come live with one of them, but she refused. "This is my home," she said firmly. "I am not leaving it." So she stayed at the ranch, living in the house Jacob had built and expanded for their growing family. Elijah and his family were nearby, checking on her daily, but Martha insisted on maintaining her independence. She cooked her own meals, tended her garden, kept the house clean. She went through the motions of living, but something essential had gone out of her. Weeks turned into months, and Martha went through the changing seasons in a daze. She could not shake the feeling that Jacob was about to walk through the door, that this was all some terrible mistake. Sometimes she would wake in the night and reach for him, only to find his side of the bed empty and cold. But she had promised him she would keep living, and Martha Hayes had never broken a promise to her husband. So she persisted. She found solace in her grandchildren, who visited often and brought light into her dark days. She took comfort in her children, who loved her fiercely and made sure she was never truly alone. She discovered new purpose in preserving the stories of her life with Jacob, writing down memories so they would not be lost. One day in the spring of 1917, 9 months after Jacob's death, Martha climbed to the attic. She had not been up here since before he died, had been avoiding it because she knew what she would find. But something drew her up on this day, and she pushed open the door and stepped inside. The 7 cradles were arranged along the wall, just as she had left them. Martha walked to the first one, the one Jacob had carved before she even told him she was pregnant with Elijah. She ran her hand over the smooth wood, feeling the love and care evident in every curve and joint. All 7 cradles, each one perfect, each one built with such tender intention. Jacob had poured his love into these, had created something that would outlast him. Martha stood in the attic, surrounded by evidence of the family they had built, and finally she cried. She cried for all the days they would not have together. She cried for the grandchildren Jacob would not meet, for the anniversaries they would not celebrate, for all the sunsets they would not watch from their porch. She cried until she had no tears left, until she was empty and exhausted and somehow lighter. When she finally stopped, Martha wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. Jacob was gone, but their love remained. It was in these cradles, in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had built, in every memory she carried. Death had taken Jacob's physical presence, but it could not touch what they had created together. Martha climbed down from the attic with new resolve. She would live, truly live, not just go through motions. She would honor Jacob's memory by embracing the life they had built, by finding joy where she could, by being present for her family. It was what he would have wanted, what he had asked her to promise. The years passed, and Martha grew old in truth. She lived to see great-grandchildren born, to celebrate the ranch's 50th anniversary, to watch as Elijah's children took over the daily operations. Her children worried about her living alone, but Martha was stubborn. insisting on independence even as her body grew frail. On a spring morning in 1925, 53 years after Jacob had begun carving that first cradle, Martha woke feeling different. She was 82 years old and her body was tired. She got out of bed slowly, moving through her morning routine with care. But instead of starting her daily tasks, she found herself drawn outside. She walked slowly up the hill to where Jacob was buried. She had not been able to visit his grave often in the first years after his death, the pain too fresh. But as time passed, she had found comfort here, talking to him as if he could hear, updating him on the family, telling him how much she still loved him. "Hello, my love," she said softly, settling herself on the bench Elijah had built beside the grave. "It is a beautiful day. The kind you always loved." She sat for a long time, watching the sun climb higher in the sky, feeling the warmth on her face. She thought about their life together, about the cradle he had carved before she told him she was pregnant, about the way he had known her so completely. She thought about their 7 children, about the ranch that still thrived, about the legacy they had built. "I kept my promise," she told Jacob. "I kept living. It was not always easy, but I did it. And it was good, Jacob, not as good as when you were here, but still good." The wind picked up, rustling through the grass, and Martha imagined it was Jacob's response. She smiled, feeling a peace settle over her that she had not felt in years. "I think I am ready now," she said quietly. "Ready to see you again. I have missed you every single day, Jacob Hayes. And I am so tired of missing you." She closed her eyes, tilted her face to the sun, and let herself remember. That day in the workshop when he showed her the cradle, the births of each of their children, the way he would hold her at night and tell her he loved her. The 1,000 small moments that made up a life together. Elijah found her there hours later, still sitting on the bench, a smile on her face. She had passed peacefully, quietly, as if she had simply decided it was time to go. Elijah wept as he gathered his mother in his arms, but part of him was glad. She had been lonely without his father, had carried on admirably, but always with a sense of waiting. Now the waiting was over. They buried Martha next to Jacob, their graves side by side on the hill overlooking the ranch. All 7 children gathered, along with spouses and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The funeral was a celebration of both Martha and Jacob, of the love story they had lived, of the family they had created. At the wake, held in the big house Martha and Jacob had built together, Elijah stood to speak. He told the story of how his father had started carving a cradle before his mother had even announced her pregnancy, of how Jacob had said he could see it in Martha's smile. "That is how they loved each other," Elijah said, his voice thick with emotion. "Completely, attentively, with every fiber of their beings. They built a life together that was extraordinary in its ordinariness. They worked hard, raised 7 children, built a ranch, and loved each other through everything. That is the legacy they left us. Not just this land or this house, but the example of how to love well and build something lasting." The 7 cradles were brought down from the attic and displayed at the wake. Each of Martha and Jacob's children told stories about sleeping in them as babies, about using them for their own children, about the care and love evident in every detail. It was decided that the cradles would be kept in the family, passed down through generations, a tangible reminder of where they all came from. Years turned into decades, and the Hayes family continued to grow and thrive. The ranch prospered, passed from Elijah to his children and eventually to their children. The house was expanded and updated but never torn down, the original structure always preserved at its core. And through it all, the story of Martha and Jacob was told and retold, becoming family legend. The tale of the cowboy who carved a cradle before his wife even told him she was pregnant, who said he could see it in her smile, became a touchstone for what love should look like. It was a story about paying attention, about knowing your partner so well that you could read their joy before they spoke it. It was about building something together, about choosing each other every day, about creating a legacy that would outlast your own life. The 7 cradles continued to be used by Hayes' descendants. Each baby who slept in one was told the story of their great-great-grandparents who had started it all. And in this way, Martha and Jacob lived on, their love story becoming immortal through the generations that followed. On the hill where they were buried, the grass grew green and the wildflowers bloomed. Their graves were tended carefully, never forgotten, always honored. And if you stood there on a spring evening when the sun was setting and the wind was blowing just right, you might almost hear them, the cowboy and his wife, talking quietly about the life they had built, the love they had shared, and the family that was their lasting gift to the world. The story of Martha and Jacob Hayes became one told throughout the valley, shared at wedding receptions and anniversary celebrations as an example of what a marriage could be. Young couples would visit their graves, hoping some of that legendary love might inspire their own relationships. Old couples would nod knowingly, recognizing the truth in the tale because they had lived their own versions of it. Time marched on, as it always does. The ranch continued through the 20th century and into the 21st, always owned by Hayes' descendants, always honoring the foundation Martha and Jacob had laid. The original house was eventually turned into a museum of sorts, preserved exactly as it had been, with one of the cradles on display in the bedroom where 6 of the 7 Hayes children had been born. And so the story ends not with an ending at all, but with continuation. Martha and Jacob's love story did not conclude when they died. It lived on in their descendants, in the ranch they had built, in the 7 cradles that rocked new babies to sleep generation after generation. It lived on in the example they set, the values they instilled, the love they demonstrated every day of their 49 years together. They had built something that truly lasted. Not just a ranch or a family, but a legacy of love that would echo through time. And it had all started with a cowboy who paid attention, who carved a cradle before his wife even told him she was pregnant, who said he could see it in her smile. That smile, full of secret joy and budding life, had been the beginning of everything. And in a very real way, it had no end. The love Martha and Jacob shared continued to ripple outward, touching lives they would never meet, inspiring love stories they would never hear about. Their great-great-great-grandchildren would sleep in those cradles, would hear the story, would learn that love, real love, is about seeing and being seen, about building something together, about choosing each other over and over again. The Montana sky still stretched wide and blue over the ranch land. The mountains still stood eternal on the horizon. The creek still bubbled over smooth stones. And somewhere in the fabric of that place, woven into the very earth and air, was the love story of Martha and Jacob Hayes, the cowboy and his wife, forever young, forever in love, forever together in the land they had claimed as their own. This was their happily ever after, not a fairy tale ending but something better, something real, something lasting. They had lived and loved and built and left behind something beautiful, and in the end that was everything that mattered. Their story was complete, their legacy secure, their love eternal. The cradles rocked on, the family grew, and the legend lived forever, passed from generation to generation, a reminder that true love sees everything, builds constantly, and lasts beyond the limits of a single lifetime. This was the story of Martha and Jacob Hayes, and it was a very good story indeed.